Morning once again and welcome. Final hour here for Breakfast Extra, and this is Focus Africa. Now, Zambia's 2026 general elections is facing fresh scrutiny after incidents of violence and attacks on election officials raised concerns over the integrity of the electoral process. The Electoral Commission of Zambia has suspended vote counting in some areas following reports of violence against election officials and the theft of marked ballot papers. The developments have also heightened concerns over whether the final result will reflect the will of Zambian voters. And
President Hichilema is seeking a second term in office, with the opposition also mounting a strong challenge. But beyond who wins the election, questions are now being raised about the credibility of the process itself. What does the violence mean for Zambia's democracy? Can the Electoral Commission maintain public confidence in the results? And what safeguards are needed to ensure that disputes do not escalate further? And joining us to examine these issues and the bigger democratic picture in Zambia is Linda Kasonde, who's the Executive Director of LCK Freedom Foundation. Linda, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us here on Focus Africa inside of Breakfast Extra. Now, let's begin with the incident of, violence reported during the election. How serious are these developments? And what do they tell us about, the state of Zambia's electoral process?
Queen, firstly, thank you for having me. And Mazimo, it really is concerning because Zambia has been known to hold peaceful elections since 1991, which was the year we returned to multi-party democracy. So we've seen violent attacks mainly by the ruling political party supporters on the opposition, although there have been some other attacks by the opposition. And in this particular election, the army has been deployed to police not only polling day, but post-polling day. And most worryingly also is allegations of abductions and armed abductions specifically of opposition political party leaders, specifically the spokesperson of the NRPUP, which is the leading opposition political party, who also happens to be a former Bar Association president, had been abducted by armed uniformed men last night, and has now been found at a police station in an area called Charleston, and his family are not being allowed access to him. So it remains to be seen what he's been charged with, but the allegation seems to be that he's been charged with treason. Another political party leader of the Independence Political Party, UNIP, Bishop Trevor Mwamba, has also gone missing, and his whereabouts are unknown to this day. It is also alleged that the opposition political party leader, Brian Mundubile, the presidential candidate, is also missing, and his house was ransacked on the 14th of August. So these are all very worrying trends, especially in the wake of the suspension of the votes on the 14th of August. Which was unprecedented in our country. We've never had a nationwide suspension of the vote tallying and vote announcements ever in our country. These are all unprecedented things that are happening. We typically never have abductions or any serious level of violence in our country. So we're quite worried about what it says about the electoral integrity of this election.
Linda, I couldn't agree with you more. I'm here looking at the history of Zambian elections since 1991, and I've seen it move from the MMD to PF to UPND, and there has been little or no trends that we see happening here in 2026. So I'm wondering how these trends, as you call them, could affect the integrity of the elections currently.
Well, specifically, we don't know if the period under which the suspension happened, because at that point, all polling agents, all election observers, all election monitors were removed from where the ballots were being kept. So there is some concern that perhaps the ballots were not safe during that time, as they were under police and army guard. So that is really of concern. And given the nature of these abductions and other kinds of violence, there is credible reason to doubt whether the incumbent would be prepared to accept defeat in the event that the elections do not go his way. As I mentioned earlier, what is happening in Zambia now is completely unprecedented.
And was the ECZ, do you think that it was, well, it was okay for it to suspend these elections at the point of these recorded violence or kidnappings?
I think the first thing I must say, even before the election was held, when the commissioners of the Electoral Commission were appointed, several members of the commission were thought to be, well, actually are affiliated to the ruling party. So there was credible reason, question about their independence and impartiality. So the Law Association of Zambia, which is the Bar Association in Zambia, issued a statement yesterday denouncing the decision to suspend the voting and tallying of results. So there are lots of players in the country who are very concerned. Civil society also yesterday issued a joint statement calling into raising the alarm about the electoral environment in which this particular election is being held.
Right. So, Linda, do we know who was responsible for these attacks, this trend, or should we be careful about attributing, this to political responsibility?
What we do know is that the NRPUP spokesperson is now under police guard at Charleston Police Station, charged with treason. After having disappeared, his family have issued a statement to that effect, and the Law Association of Zambia is looking into the matter. So that is definitely a credible report. Also, the disappearance of Bishop Trevor Mwamba, the president of UNIP, is also been verified by his family, specifically his wife, who is a former Deputy Secretary General of the Commonwealth. So these are credible reports. He has officially been reported missing.
Interesting. Now let's talk about the ballot boxes. They were affected ballot papers. Would you say that the Electoral Commission now can account for those papers and establish that the chain of custody still remains intact?
To my knowledge, they haven't sufficiently addressed that issue. There was a press briefing yesterday at which that question was specifically asked and was not directly responded to.
Okay, now with everything that is happening here, it's like Zambia's democratic process is being put to the test in 2026. And even after all of this, after the results might have been announced, and if nothing goes wrong after then, do you think that Zambia will step away from this seeming differently? Do you think it will still uphold that place in Africa's history as one of the African countries with the least problems when it comes to transfer of governance?
I think what we can say is that democracy is definitely under threat currently, given the happenings around this particular election. Because previously, as you mentioned, we've had smooth transitions of power. Our elections, when contested, are contested through courts. We've never had unrest, unlike what we see in other countries in the region. So what we're experiencing now is foreign to our country.
Right. So, Linda, would you say suspending, the counting was the correct decision to make at this time, or the suspension has actually raised more suspicion?
It has definitely raised more suspicion because the reason given by the Electoral Commission for suspending the vote was that there were a few incidences of violence in polling stations. I think some polling agents were allegedly being attacked. And that does not justify a nationwide suspension of vote tallying and vote announcements by any stretch of the imagination. So there is no credible reason for that nationwide suspension.
Linda, worst case scenario, what happens if both parties were to reject the outcome of the elections? Worst case scenario.
Presumably, that would have to be determined by a court of law, and then there would have to be a new election. But of course, there's a difference between the presidential election and the parliamentary elections. If you're speaking about the presidential election, then that would be contested through a presidential petition, and the court would decide what would happen in terms of whether or not there's need to call for a fresh election.
Yes. You and other civil society had warned earlier before the elections that there were going to be political violence and intimidation. Would you say that they did not take those warnings seriously?
Like I mentioned, this is completely unprecedented. So many people, even now, when we have reported incidents of abductions and of President Mundubile's house, opposition political president, Brian Mundubile's house being ransacked, people don't believe it. And in fairness, there has been some misinformation on social media, which has caused the reason for disbelief. But these are credible reports which can be verified.
Okay.
Let's look at the sequence of events here from when violence erupted for the elections here. After the violence, there was the ECZ suspension. The ballots the ballots were secured. There were also parallel results, by the way, and of course, premature victory claims. These premature victory claims, exactly from where were they coming, and how has it influenced the conditions currently?
So at the time that ECZ announced the suspension, the leading opposition party leader, Brian Mundubile, went on social media and announced that he had won the presidential election, which of course was ill-advised because at that point, very few constituencies had their votes announced. So very premature. But I think that there are credible institutions such as the Christian Churches Monitoring Group that do parallel voter tabulation. So it'll be interesting to see how their results compare to those against the official Electoral Commission results. But they have been hesitant to release their parallel votes tabulation because of the potential of being accused of not giving official results, right, and possible prosecution as a result.
Okay, Linda, I think to what extent would you say political parties and their supporters bear responsibility in situations like this? What would you say they should be doing now to reduce these tensions?
They should definitely be calling for calm. Unfortunately, we haven't really seen any statements from either the ruling party president or the opposition party leader, Brian Mundubile, in the recent days calling for calm and the respect of the official process. On the part of Mr. Mundubile, it could be because he has now allegedly gone missing.
Okay.
But I think it's incumbent on all leaders in our country to call for peaceful, calm, and fair elections so that we have a credible result. But given what we've seen so far, definitely there is serious question as to whether or not these elections have been free and fair.
Linda, let's remove the individuals, the parties and all. Let's talk about the people who matter most, the voters. How have they taken the instances that have followed these violence, these disappearances, these securing of ballot boxes? What are they saying? What's the chatter? Do they still believe in the integrity of the ECZ? And, well, do you think that they still believe in the ECZ itself?
So on the day that ECZ called the suspension of the vote tallying and vote announcements, that's on the 14th of August, there was a bit of unrest following that announcement, given the suspicion that something untoward was happening. But since then, the country, or certainly in Lusaka, I can speak of with authority, there has been general calm. But I think things may change as more results are announced.
If things change, where would be the ground zero if they do?
probably, the two epicenters would probably be Lusaka and the Copperbelt, which have the largest voter populations. So those are areas to watch out for.
Right. So, Linda, Brian Mundubile has made claims about, victory before the official declaration. How dangerous are these premature victories in this situation?
Well, thankfully, it wasn't announced too close to the tallying of all the results, because that probably would have led to an inflamed situation. Like I mentioned, there were some some unrest when the suspension was announced, but that seems to have quietened down. And I think I've mentioned earlier that the army has been deployed to police this particular election. So there's also some unease as to that situation. As you know, the Zambia Police Service are the only constitutionally mandated body or institution that are meant to guard the internal security of a country. So this is also a point of departure from other elections.
Right. So, Linda, what would be your advice now to the citizens of Zambia in terms of this situation? Will you tell them to say, you know what, trust the process, let's trust and see what comes out of this? What would you say to them?
I think we should wait for the official results to come out. The Electoral Commission had earlier indicated that they would give the announcement within 72 hours of the closing of the final polling station, but it looks like there may be some delay. We may know the final result by Monday, but it's yet to be seen.
Okay. I want to say thank you so much, Linda Kasonde, who's the Executive Director of LCK Freedom Foundation, for joining us to have this conversation. Like you said, we have up until Monday to know what happens or the outcome of this election. Thank you so much, Linda.
Thank you, Linda.
Thank you, Queen. Thank you, Mazima.
All right.
Bye.